Okay,
So,
all right. We've got the nod then. So, hello everybody, and welcome to July's PRCA Social Hour. Very welcome to join us on a pretty sweltering Thursday. Hope everyone's surviving the heat. My name is Will Cooke. I'm Head of Strategy here at M&C Saatchi Talk, and I am beyond delighted to actually be doing this talk, but also doing this talk in person with Saif Islam, founder of M.I.N, the Muslin Influencer network, and the incredible creative consultancy Creed and Culture, to have hopefully a really interesting conversation today, hopefully something that we can all take something away from. We were just talking beforehand about the fact that this is a talk that we've been discussing for a while. It's something that we've been keen to do for a while. And in some ways, there's serendipity has been on our side. We find ourselves around Eid. We don't know if you can hear that in the background. We've got other festivals happening in the middle of Soho as well. And I mean, for better or worse, we know diversity in social is back in the headlines, and it's something that clearly not enough is being done. So hopefully today what we can talk about is arming all of you with learnings, opening up our perspectives on how to build campaigns. And I mean, hopefully, I think as Saif's going to talk about, and certainly the philosophy behind businesses that you founded and run, actually try and use our marketing investments to bring a bit more good and drive some positive change. So again, absolutely delighted. Saif, do introduce yourself to the folks.
thank you so much, Will. To be honest, the pleasure's all mine to be here with you, mate. It's nice to be in an office environment. So we've actually put together something to run everyone through our angle of diversity inclusion, particularly looking at the Muslim market. As you said, Eid was only a few days, literally it was yesterday for a lot of people, Tuesday for as well the other side of the Muslim economy. So with that being said, let me just bring up the presentation and share my screen, which is, for some reason, a year of doing this, challenging. So for us, our objective here today is to help you understand the Muslim market. As we said, with it being the second Eid festival, so there's two Eids in the year, the Muslim economy, there's 2 billion people, and it'll be attached to a question I asked later on as well, worth over 2 trillion. It's pretty important, as we've seen with the likes of Nike, Adidas, Anki and many brands are now considering this market, that you get things right. That being said, I'd like to share with you a case study first and foremost to help you understand the importance of doing things right. So in 2018, H&M launched a modest fashion line aiming to capture the global Muslim market worth over 226 billion, sorry. But then this happened. Comments like this started to appear. It's frustrating when brands release a modest collection that's nothing modest about it. Who told them that random slits and plunging necklines were modest? And comments like this, H&M's modest range, I wouldn't buy anything. It was an Asian-inspired collection that wasn't actually modest. The final nail in the coffin was this video from leading Muslim influencer Dina Tokyo, titled, H&M's modest collection got me fuming. Really? And this garnered nearly 1 million views. Within 6 months, H&M had actually pulled their collection from the shop floors, losing millions in inventory costs and hundreds of millions in sales. It's fair to say it was a disaster. But they're not the only leading brand to have got things wrong when it comes to diversity and inclusion, in particular in this case, the Muslim market. So my job today is to help you understand this market in particular. Like Will said, we have our creative consultancy, Creed and Culture, that helps brands understand different faiths, different communities, and simply understand the power that those faiths, those religions have when it comes to the decisions that people make. But why you need to pay attention to this particular talk, we'll talk about the importance of the Muslim market, the business case, and real life examples with the data to simply break down why it's so important to brands being able to increase market share, stay at the front of innovation, and be considerate of changing trends, even within the UK. But first, who on earth am I and why you should listen to me? I think we've always got to evidence that and prove ourselves along the way in the journey. I'm co-founder of M.I.N, as Will has already introduced. I've been fortunate to be recognised as a top 50 thought leader in the influencer marketing space, specialising in digital strategy, diversity, faith and inclusion comms. We've worked with the likes of the UN, Primark, Co-op, and many others launch their influencer inclusion-based comms. What real claim to fame is this blue Peter badge that I won when I was 9 years old for a poem. Mum's still got the letter frame somewhere in our house, so that's the best of me right there. And we've worked, like we've already demonstrated and showed, some amazing brands. Some of the work that we've done has actually culminated in charities raising over 5 million in donations. And that's the thing when it comes to inclusion-based comms. What's the objective? How do we connect it to some sort of real purpose where we're changing the world positively? That's the reason behind why we created M.I.N, in particular, green culture. So before we continue, does anyone want to take a guess? I did share this at the beginning. It was the title slide as well. So for those of you that are paying attention, how many Muslims are there in the world? If you want to drop that into the chat before I continue, see how much people are paying attention. Any guesses? And if not, Will, you can have a guess.
This has got me a bit worried because I've been sitting here and I've seen this presentation a few times. 2.8.
2.8, not bad guess. Not bad guess.
Not bad.
Any takers?
Got someone saying 2. So someone saying they're not actually able to get into the chat. But yeah, 2. Yeah, it seems to be people are saying around 2 billion.
2 billion. It's a great guess. Yes, that's the correct answer. Nearly 2 billion Muslims around the world, making up nearly a quarter of the world population, set to increase to 2.2 billion by 2030. And for CMOs, for marketing strategists, what's the importance? It's they contribute to nearly 2 trillion worth of worth when it comes to the economy, the global economy. This spend's actually set to rise to nearly 6 trillion by 2050. And in Europe alone, the Muslim consumer spend is growing by 15% every year. It's not only an emerging market anymore, it's a rapidly growing economy because of average age increasing and therefore disposable income in the likes of countries like the UK. There'll be nearly 3 billion Muslims by 2050 as well. So what are some of the terminologies that you need to be aware of and how is it described when it comes to whether it's further research that you want to do, try and find thought leadership pieces, people to follow, what's the rhetoric that they use? Fundamentally, the economy in the industry is known as the halal economy. And why is this though? Why is it interchangeably used with the Muslim market? It's because it's just simply more palatable for a lot of organizations, for the industry, when it was starting to really flourish. So in the late 90s and the early 2000s, with the rhetoric, obviously, and the awareness around the Muslim economy, obviously had 9/11. Therefore, having Muslim plastered everywhere wasn't always palatable for people. So the industry was definitely growing, but when it comes to resonance and appreciation, it had to be considered and approached in a different way. That's why when it comes to research material, just knowing this nuance will allow you to understand and break down strategies and just be able to find the data and the insights that you're looking for to package this for your clients. So historically, halal was referred to the permissibility of eating certain foods, certain meats, etc. But now it represents a global industry. And why is this so? It's a way in which we create, showcase, and do business. But because of the thought leaders and the innovators in the space who are simply Muslim, you've got Mo Salah, plays for Liverpool Football Club, Khabib, the UFC fighter, the champion of UFC in particular, Riz Ahmed, the actor, who's now leading on this initiative for the creative space for actors who are Muslim, and how we integrate them into the wider comms. And then obviously my favorite, because maybe she's Bangladeshi, like myself, Nadi Hussain as well, who are really innovating and leading in the space. So what are some of the things that you should know about Muslims in particular? Ogilvy research has found that 90% of Muslims say that faith affects their consumption. Just let that sink in. Over 90% of Muslims say that their faith affects the way that they eat, the way that they consume, the way that they buy, the way that they share, the way that they communicate. Meaning that all these components come together in simply informing you how you should speak to this community. And faith is at the center, at the core of that strategy. So why is this important for the United Kingdom? The Muslim population in the UK is set to triple in 30 years, rising from 4.1 million in 2016 to nearly 13 million in 2050. That's obviously 3 times more. In London alone, though, interestingly, the Muslim population makes up nearly 12.5% of the city's population. So 1 in 10, when you're on the underground, you're looking around, 1 in 10 people around you, one of those people will most likely be Muslim. Of the city's population, 84% of those are in the age bracket 23 and above. So that's the disposable income range, more spend. And the UK halal economy itself, so in the UK alone, it's worth over 20.5 billion and expected to grow 5% annually. These are big numbers. So if you want to screenshot them, feel free to do so. And in particular, what are some of the sectors that are really growing and flourishing? You've got modesty and fashion lifestyle that's really taking off. A large 83% of Muslim women who visit a fashion accessory store or website each month say that they're more willing to spend if they're simply considered and catered for. So that might be in messaging, that might be in a modest fashion collection. And why is this important? Is because it adds over 16% to the bottom line. So if you're talking straight numbers, if you're thinking about share price and share value, these are the things that you need to know as to why you should consider the Muslim market, particularly modest fashion within the Muslim market, if you're in that sector. And Google Trends have actually noticed that searches around modest fashion increased by over 500%. It was classed as a breakout term because of the rapidly increasing search volume. And then there's Ramadan, and there's 2 real key seasons that you need to know about when it comes to the Muslim market. The first is Ramadan. So what are some of the trends? First and foremost, if you were to go away and think about some case studies, are there some great examples? Samsung Rubicon have done some great work, McDonald's in Indonesia and Malaysia. And simply put, what happens in Indonesia and Malaysia, normally what happens in the GCC is they take inspiration from the West. But when it comes to the activity around the Muslim market, because these are Muslim countries, a lot of the inspiration comes from the East. And that's why it's worth looking at what campaigns are happening, what brands are doing in the East to integrate elements of it, obviously not language, rhetoric, but elements around imagery, around messaging, around the moments that you can integrate into your strategy. And that's why these brands have done some great work, Samsung, Maybelline, F&F as well in particular. So what are some of the trends in Ramadan? How does it go? It's not like Christmas where brand planning and marketing might start in September time. Ramadan, it's like we just switch on about 2 weeks before. So nothing happens months before. People start to become cognizant, maybe a month before, but 2 weeks before, that's when search volume really starts to ramp up. There's changes in behavior on clothing, so attire, what people eat, what they consume, what content they watch, their gym habits, their, like fitness habits, their lifestyle habits, all because of the prayer that's added in the month of Ramadan, all because they're not able to fast. Yeah, that's no food, no water for approximately 16 hours. So people need to know the adaptation strategies. And I'm 30 years old and I'm still researching the same things, like what to eat in Ramadan so my fast is easier, because that's what we want to know. What to actually buy from, does Asda cater for Muslims in the UK? Can I find my groceries? What modest collections my wife and my sisters wear the headscarf? Which are the brands that launch modest collections around that time? So that generally happens about 2 weeks before, and a week before it really starts to ramp up. But most of the activity happens around this time period, which is the first 10 days. This is the first 10 days of Ramadan, where everyone's excited, everyone's looking forward to the month. It's really spiritual. Then the hump happens, which is, my goodness, we've got to continue these 16-hour fasts for another 20 days or so. But naturally, as you get over that hump, that middle 10 days, the last 10 days, spiritually for Muslims, is known as the most rewarding 10 days. And because of that, activity and habits really change. The last 10 days are the most important. And even within the last 10 days of Ramadan, you have the odd nights of Ramadan, where rewards are outlined as being, simply put, it's outlined to be more rewarding to fast. And it's have the activities and simply carry yourself in a more positive manner when it comes to your faith on the odd nights. So you'll see a spike in activity in the last 10 days, in particular the odd nights, and even more so on the 27th night of Ramadan, which is symbolically and historically the most important night for a majority of Muslims when it comes to the month. So messaging, when it comes to resonance, when it comes to nuances, when it comes to consideration, you need to be aware in the last 10 nights, particularly the odd nights, and then the 27th is your winner, followed by the 29th night of Ramadan. Then that culminates in Eid, which is a celebration. I don't know if we're all celebrating because we can drink again in normal daylight hours and have some food. But this is around Eid time where it's very much about those family moments, the community moments. So when it comes to your creativity and your messaging, that should be at the core, at the center of your creatives. That should be at the center of your narrative, those family moments, and just have that consideration. Last year, most of us were in lockdown. So when it comes to the brands, we were tapping into the moments and the occasions that people were missing out on because they couldn't celebrate Eid as a family. And just having brands being aware of that allows them to have more depth when it comes to their creativity, when it comes to the communication. This is a week after Eid. Obviously, it's a whole process, but now we have to begin again. So what about Eid al-Adha? The Eid that was just 2 days ago. This actual Eid is very different to the month of Ramadan, which culminates in 30 days of fasting. This Eid is based around the fifth pillar of Islam, which is Hajj. So it's not a 30-day festivity, or it's not culminating after a 30-day festivity. It's just a few days. And Eid is particularly just 1 or 2 days. So what are the trends that happen? Unlike Ramadan, maybe it's a month out, in particular 2 weeks out, it's really a week before where people are starting to be aware Eid's happening next week. What do we need to buy? Who do we invite? What's our outfit? Have we got enough food? Which shops are we going to go to? It happens a week before because it's attached to Hajj, which is the fifth pillar. And Hajj is actually only 5 days. So this is the day before Eid al-Adha, which is the most important day of Hajj. So a week before there's a ramp up, which then slows down, and there's a massive build up, massive spike, because it's the day before the Eid day itself, but it's the most important day of Hajj. This might sound a bit complex, but literally a week before, the 5 days you need to know about, the day before is most important, and then you've got the day of Eid. Why is the day before Eid so critical? Because it's known as the day of new beginnings. So people undertaking this pilgrimage, which is the fifth pillar, it's like starting afresh, starting with a clean slate. And even for those who are remote, who haven't undertaken the Hajj experience, who are at home, they feel that they can experience it too. And that's why Eid is almost like a very different emotion that's present when it comes to this Eid. The previous Eid is all about celebration, unity, and this one is as well. But the underlying sentiment is, a fresh beginning, new beginnings. So when it comes to messaging, when it comes to narrative, that's what you need to know about. And then what happens at the end of the Hajj month is, because Muslims follow the lunar calendar, you've got the new Islamic year. So when it comes to messaging in GCC, you'll see a lot of New Year celebrations, and the Islamic New Year this year is around August time. So just knowing that will allow you to be able to present and position your brand accordingly. Which brands are doing some great work? You've seen, and you might have seen, the likes of Nike doing some exceptional work when it comes to the modest fashion collection. Lidl, they've done some extensive work working with Muslin influencers when it comes to content creation. So what I really like about the Lidl work, it wasn't a direct sell. So it wasn't like the modest fashion items, even though we respect Nike and the items that they put out. With Lidl, it generally felt like they were helping the Muslim community, because they were saying, these are the recipes that you can make. These are the ingredients that you can use. And having that consideration allowed people to know, Lidl actually helped me this year. I'm going to go shop at Lidl instead. So just having that education piece is very powerful. And IKEA, I think they topped it all. So last year, when lockdown was happening, people couldn't actually undertake their prayers in the mosque. So IKEA actually gave up their car parks in Germany to let people pray there. It's a great piece of marketing, if you think about it. Yeah. You've got thousands of people coming for prayer. Most likely, if they've traveled all that way, they'll probably nip into IKEA to see what essentials they need as well. So really, obviously, customer sentiment-wise, really powerful. And this is really important. Why is it so critical that you're aware of the Muslim market? Kantar reports sales of FMCG products more than doubles, and in some cases, increases to over 20 times, in fact, during the month of Ramadan and leading up to Eid al-Adha. Powerful stuff when it comes to CMOs trying to argue why they should be doing this stuff. these are the types of stats that you're going to be using. So some of the case studies that we want to share in particular, we worked with F&F, Tesco's F&F, helping them understand the modest market. And a lot of the apprehension is, we don't want to sign off, commission a new line, because we don't know if there's going to be appetite, but how do we still capture that market? That was F&F's question. And we partnered them with an influencer called Arla Jasmine. She just took with us items from their current collections and made them into a modest look, and then created 4 collections within their wider collection. I think it was the spring summer collection, that allowed Muslims that following her, that are aware of her, to simply know that there's a collection here within F&F's range that will help you during the month of Ramadan. It's really powerful. And we just connected the key moments. So naturally, when you're fasting for about 16 hours, no food, no water, all you do is think and talk about food. So you literally counting down the minutes and seconds that you can eat. Most of the time it's like 9:13, like, has it hit prayer time yet? Are you ready to eat? So the moment we captured here is the one with her husband, where she was going to eat, breaking their fast. The other thing, if you're not thinking and talking about food, you're buying food. And that's what she was doing, obviously connecting Tesco with the F&F range here on her daily shop or her weekly shop in the month of Ramadan. And there was other moments when it comes to prayer, because the pre-dawn meal we have to undertake around 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and there's output related to that. And from 8 posts, nearly 500,000 when it comes to reach, an incredible amount of engagement. So just touching on the moments again, this is the same with Co-op. And Co-op traditionally, they were saying, we don't want to alienate our typical clientele, but we know that the Muslim market is a growing market, in particular in Ramadan. How do we engage with this market without alienating this market? And simply put, influencers are the quickest way, but it's only if they can really touch onto the emotional moments. So here we have Cook with Anisa, one of the influencers, and she has 2 young children. So she gathered her 2 young children to create recipes. And Ramadan is about family. Even though it's about prayer, it's about spirituality and that individual journey, it really is about family, in particular for Western Muslims. Because you've grown up, cooking with your mum, the month of Ramadan, there's typical dishes that we have. So tapping into that messaging allowed Co-op to engage with the Muslim market without actually alienating their current clientele and typical clientele. And that strategically adds value, because you're proving this concept, almost like your proof of concept, your innovation campaign. This can be done by working with influencers. And Primark, so Primark came to us because the modest market, as we shared at the beginning, worth over 226 billion. They came to us and they knew that they had to launch a modest range. Positionally, the Asian and particularly Muslims who are Asian, when it comes to average spend, average consumer spend value, it might be on the lesser scale than the average consumer. And therefore, more Asians will shop at the likes of Primark, Tesco's, F&F. And they were aware of that. So they launched the modest collection, but they didn't know how to bring it to market. And we've talked before about new product ranges. Fundamentally, you launch new products, you don't want it to fail. And if you're launching the product to tap into a particular consumer set, you need to know who the people that can bring it to market. So what were the results of us working with Primark? The collections actually sold out, and there was over-indexing in positive sentiment. And we just finished working with them on their second campaign because it was so successful. And the thing with Primark in organizations that have done it successful, campaigns often start small, but you have to work with the product team as well. Those insights have to be shared with the product team. So then we ran a focus group that allowed the product team to understand what were the wins, what were the things that we have to improve on to make the second collection even better. And that's really important. And this was the same. So these are some of the campaigns that we've done now for the likes of Canva through Creed and Culture. This was in Indonesia. This was during lockdown last year. No one could see their family. And so we created with our influencers digital e-cards that they create using Canva. And the success of this campaign and the importance of why I was talking about the product team, this campaign, the templates that were being used were so frequently used afterwards that they actually affect the design of the products that Canva were building as a base template. So they were able to take insights and say, actually, this is how we need to adapt our products for Indonesia. Just by looking at different markets and having different insights when it comes to inclusion diversity, that's the importance of it. It's people with fresh ideas, a fresh approach. a different narrative that will provide you with incredible insights to help your product be stronger across different markets. And these are just some of the results from 8 influencers. You know, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to reach, over 2 million reach just from 8 influencers. Same with Lidl, coming back to what Lidl were doing, again, just focusing on the recipes as we touched on earlier. It's really powerful. And they complemented the influence activity with print activity. So that was something that was really unique. Most of the time, people just want to focus on digital on the influencers on platform, because they're maybe scared of allowing it to become public knowledge that we're doing this thing. And doing or being brave enough from Lidl's perspective to do something like this. And it does take a brave brand to recognize that diversity inclusion needs to be part of corporate strategy and brand strategy to begin with. Allows them to, maybe some elements, some corners of the world, they might suffer, but over the long term, over a longer period of time, they'll be the winners, because they are communicating and engaging with different markets that have incredible value. And that can be done offline and online as well. And here's some of the results of the Ramadan campaign with Lidl. And this is what creating culture is all about. So we've been focusing on the M.I.N side of things, but that's really why we created creating culture, because diversity and inclusion isn't just related to one particular community, one particular faith. To really create incredible change and lead to positive change, we have to work together. More communities have to come together. You know, there needs to be more interfaith dialogue. And that's something that we recognize with our brand partners, with the organizations that we helped. And that's something that we've been able to do even during the likes of, during the months of COVID, the height of COVID. It was people of Asian background, minority, ethnic background that were more impacted. So the government came to us through our partner agencies, and we put on campaigns to help educate people from diverse backgrounds about the importance of staying home, the importance of maintaining social distancing, and the simple things that is really powerful when it comes to the overall picture. Some of the work that we've done with supported the likes of Vita Coco, and that was a really interesting campaign because that was in America as well as the UK. Diversity, faith, and inclusion is more important than ever, but it's also more valuable than ever before. And I don't know if you guys can see this screen, but Halima Aden, the supermodel, actually has shown that you have to be acutely aware of the sensitivities around what's important to the community of people, because it leads to actions like this, where she actually quit fashion because it contradicted with the values of her faith. And that's the thing, you can't just have something done tokenistically. There needs to be depth to that actual communication strategy when it comes to inclusion and diversity. For some, the Muslim market in this case may be too alien, too unfashionable, but for many, it's one they can't ignore, meaning there is actually a $2 trillion problem out there. We hope to continue to help you understand the importance and the how of solving it. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Well, firstly, thanks to Saif for, first of all, being here and talking to us about this. Also a big thanks to everyone who's already shared questions in advance. Some really good stuff coming through from people. The Q&A box is open, so if there's anything else that people want to jump in with, do let us know, and we'll certainly be sharing links to Creating Culture, to M.I.N, and some other resources following this. But just touching on a couple of things that you've just talked about. So there's one of the things that's really struck me from the conversations and why it relates so much to, I think, today's conversation, is that we've positioned this as part of the social hour. And so we know a lot of you that are here, that are viewing, that are sharing this, are the people that are putting together the social strategies, that are putting together the content calendars. And we know, because of the nature of our industry, because of the pace, because of the demands, that very often there's a temptation to go sort of revert back to that generalized everyone and that kind of bland culture. But I think what's come through today, and what's always struck me about our conversations, is you've talked about this idea of a cognizant cultural calendar, which I just cannot get enough of that idea. The idea that, cultural calendars are fine, but unless we have the depth and the nuance of the understanding, we're not going to be able to really engage. You talked about tokenism that kind of comes in there as well. I mean, just on that perspective, you talked to us about the timings of engaging with Ramadan and timings that people should be engaging at the moment. Are there any brands that you've seen who've managed to do things well in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the one that's really stood out for us is definitely the example that we've seen through Asda. So Asda in pockets, just sharing messaging, showing that they're aware.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, when you speak to different diverse and, different communities, different cultures, different faith backgrounds, first of the time, they just want to be recognized. Like, it goes back to that human desire of recognition, right? And that's the first thing. But when it comes to the follow-up strategy, it's great, you've brought us in now. Like, what else is there? It's the depth to this. So Asda historically, the messaging is great, but just having they've got the world food section, the halal section, shows that they're adding layers to that top level strategy, which is that recognition. So Asda definitely a brand that stood out. There's the Anchor piece. We've worked with Anchor Button. It's probably easy for me to say Anchor doing something that's quite well respected. But I think the first step is just one, the recognition element. But if you're scared perhaps of doing something serious, whether it comes to a proper diverse inclusion strategy, is plot out the key seasons like an Asda probably have done and thought, what's the minimum that we can do that wouldn't be seen as being tokenistic? What are the nuances that we need to consider of? And that's why those two brands in particular stand out. You've got in the likes of Indonesia, Malaysia, so many brand examples across the GCC community. Under Armour actually launched a modest collection about a week before, 2 weeks before. The timing was brilliant for me because the hot weather, obviously the intensity of the weather, and the modest collection was around swimwear. So, historically, Muslim women wouldn't be able to engage in that activity and fear that the clothing would be too revealing and go against their faith values. So that modest collection, considerate of the timing, and that's an important thing, the timing, right? So definitely Under Armour, definitely Asda, and Anchor Butter across those different industries.
I think what's interesting is a lot of the examples here are coming from supermarkets, from the retailers. I mean, is it the case that we think the retailers are just a bit more switched on to what the customers are after?
I think there's an element of that. And maybe the other element is they probably have access to more data. Like the amount of consumer data that they probably have, they probably see anomalies, trends in that data, that what happened last year on this day that we need to be aware of. What were the key seasons? Were the key culture festivities, key faith festivities? And they probably plotted backwards that they were. So that's why if you're looking at a culture content calendar, which I think all organizations should have, look at what supermarkets are doing because they've got access probably to the widest pool of data, or the likes of a Facebook, or the likes of a Lloyd's Bank, because the banking sector a lot of data, and look at the messaging that they put out around these key seasons and key cultural festivals and moments, and then think, okay, why did they do that? What can we take, as a lifestyle brand? What can we take, as a different food brand? What can we understand from this, and then build out from there?
Interesting. The subsect of this, working with some of those retailers, what I thought was really interesting is your point on elevating this or collaborating with the product teams. There'll be an awful lot of people on this on this Zoom who will feel the pain of being sort of pushed into a corner as the social team or the PR team and kind of ignored by everyone else in the business. What feels really powerful here is that actually, for it to be successful, it has to be engaged with by more people in the business. And when they do, there are brilliant results. I mean, the F&F example, I absolutely love because it was taking something that existed, it was bringing customer insight to it, it was bringing empathy and understanding, and it gave it a different perspective, which earned people's attention. So it's really powerful. Have you found, because you're talking to a lot of businesses through the lens of D&I, that they're more open to collaboration through the business?
I think there's always openness when it's flavor of the month, just being honest. But I think there's always more so apprehension around doing this because it's something new. Like we're fearful of getting things wrong. And that's the narrative that you hear too often. We're fearful of getting things wrong. We love to do this, but are we sure we're going to be able to do it right? Because obviously when you're working as an agency or a brand, you don't want to lose consumers, lose market share. Potential is only great if you can actually do something with it, right? If you actually take advantage of the opportunity. And that's why it's important to start at the beginning. Most of the time it's adding on at the end, like we've got this budget left over, or our brand partners told us that we need to do something here. We don't really know why or where we should start. But that's why it has to be part of like corporate strategy and brand strategy to begin with. So it's not an afterthought. So it's not, tokenistic. There's plenty of great examples, plenty of bad examples too. And it's probably because they didn't have insights from people, who's the target audience here? And let's actually bring them in. Just as simple as that. When it comes to the H&M example, like there wasn't any existing awareness and appreciation that actually we're going after the modest market. Let's work with maybe some consultants that actually understand that audience. And it's the same when you speak to people from the Hindu community, you speak to Sikhs, like if you are trying to target them when it comes to consumer value, make sure they're part of the discussion to begin with, because they'll probably evidence some nuances that you would never have recognized.
It's maybe one of the great ironies of the D&I situation we find ourselves in, that a lot of people are put off by it, scared about doing something that could be perceived badly or could have a backlash. When the reality is, as you say, you just need to go and speak to your customers. You just need to listen to people's experience, which at a very simple level is one of those kind of pillars of marketing comms as a whole. Do we actually know what the people we're serving want? And so I think with the build on that is that there'll be a lot of people in the industry who are at the moment looking at that spreadsheet and they're filling in their cultural calendar, and they're looking for inspiration for those things, or they're doing an influencer campaign and they're cutting and pasting that same list of people that look like they've all been on Love Island. Obviously what we're talking about here is not groundbreaking stuff, but it's just bringing more insight, bringing more empathy, bringing more understanding, because that's a whole audience that otherwise they're ignoring. And certainly I know M.I.N, the influencer network, started life as a bit of a frustration, I guess, with that same old grip and grin influencer work. So how can people take a bit more of an open-minded approach when they're building those sort of creative strategies? It sounds like getting people in, getting the customers in, the influencers in as soon as possible to collaborate. Yeah,
I think so. Obviously, COVID and post-COVID will be very interesting to see like how strategies adapt. But for us, historically, that might have been bring some influencers in, just listen to them and see what they're saying, because influencers, they're probably closer to their audiences than most people are when it comes to the consumers, right? Now that's not probably as accessible. So what we do actually for brands is we actually suggest commissioning influencer pieces through their polls and get some real-time data. So just come up with some questions. Let's go and ask the influencers to ask their audiences before you maybe delve straight into a D&I campaign or D&I strategy. Like ask the audiences that you want to try and connect with. And it doesn't have to be now bring influence into a room. Let's just leverage their platform that already exists, their relationships that they already have. And instead of getting to, post about a product that they probably don't care about, a lot of the time that is the case, just being honest, like why don't we actually use it for good? Find out what people actually want to see. What are the insights that have been missed? What's the conversations that brands need to be aware of? Like and the example would be, I think we were talking about the Asda thing before. Like Asda is great when it comes to messaging, but when you go to most Asdas, if you're in the winter months and it's between the time of 2 and 5, like you don't have time to think about, do I go to Asda? Because you've got to make 2 prayers as a Muslim if you're practicing Muslim in that time frame. So having that consideration, Asda could have used a few influencers to find out what's important to you when you shop at an Asda between this time. How often do you shop? And they probably find the answers that we don't shop as much in this time. Why is this so? And after a few layers of conversation, the person might say, oh, because I've got to pray. And then if I break my ablution, which is the pre-ritual to pray. They have to go home to make it all over again. So actually, why don't we create a prayer room? Because if we can get people to stay here, there's more consumer value. Because the average person might spend 45 minutes in an Asda, but someone who's from Muslim background might have multiple family members, so the list might be bigger. If it's 90 minutes and there's 2 prayers, they've got time to make the prayer in an Asda. Actually, let's put prayer rooms so they stay here and they do their shop. It's a bit of a cynical, that's more like a cynical strategy, right? But just be considerate, ask the audience, you know what I mean? So very simple thing to do.
I said cynical. I think you were a bit more positive and optimistic about it. I think, we've had a couple of great comments through the Q&A talking about how little the communities, the people who write the comments that they live within, the fact that they don't feel represented, don't see themselves, aren't recognized through social. And you talked about that recognition as one of those human truths. And I mean, it's one of the fundamental tenets of social. We know there's that reciprocity that actually when we spend time with people, when you listen to people, when you offer understanding to people, actually they will pay it back in droves, and actually they're more likely to advocate as well. So I guess this is the kind of interesting part with all of this, isn't it? It's that the D&I isn't a nice to have. It isn't just the kind of corporate legislative or policy piece that you've got to adhere to. If you're trying to communicate this to the client, if you're the client yourself and you've got to take this further up the food chain, it fundamentally just comes back to better understanding of the audience, interest in the audience, in wanting to engage them more so. And so it does. We've talked a lot here about the Muslim economy, but the work you've done through Creed and Culture obviously is much broader than that.
Definitely, and I think there's actually a start that I find it hard to ever forget when it comes to the importance of diversity and inclusion. And McKinsey reported that teams and organizations that are more diverse and inclusive add over 2 billion to bottom line of Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 1000 companies as well. So we're not talking small numbers here, because more collaboration, better ideas, more variance in ideas will actually lead to more problems being solved. Because someone will bring up, because they have different shared experience, different experiences and different lived experiences through shared values, which is, I want to help the client succeed. Fundamentally, that's what we're here to do. I want to help our organization succeed, and these are our goals. But how are we doing that? How are we collaborating to solving the problems that we have, speaking to the different communities where there might be hidden values? And that's the best way.
And I mean, that point, and echoed by a couple of people on the comments about engaging with the communities, I think is an aspect that also sits closer to home for a lot of us, that as an industry at the moment, we're asking, and we rightly say asking a lot of questions about ourselves, the makeup, the diversity within our own industry. And I think certainly the way you've talked about it is, and the way you've just described it, is that D&I, again, the other benefit is that creativity that comes with it. The diversity of thought and perspective drives much better work ultimately, because it's coming from a richer place.
I think so. The founder of Netflix, he was saying that he didn't like remote working because it really compromises collaboration. And if that's the case when it comes to collaboration, people should be more receptive to the idea of diversity and inclusion and strategy, because it breeds and fosters this idea of more synergy and collaboration. Because you're actually speaking to someone that you don't listen anything of their community, and giving them a platform to help you learn and your brand learn. Fundamentally, that's what you're here to do. And that's why it's important, when I came into the building, the team member of yours downstairs, who's Christian, she was talking about her perspective of prayer and how much just shared learning that was, and new appreciations for me, even though, that's a community that I help brands and our team help brands, it's still a fresh perspective, just by simply having a shared goal, which was, we've got this idea of collaboration here from different communities. What can we actually talk about? What are the problems that we can solve? And her narrative, by the way, was just around the idea of more enjoyment of work. That's where it stemmed from. So if you're able to just understand how important this value being able to pray at work as a Christian is to her. She's now saying that it will impact the way that she does her work. And that impacts productivity, which impacts the ability to deliver for your clients as an agency. So it started from that small thing. So that's why those nuances have to be considered, because your workforce will be more productive if you're simply more considerate of different communities.
Which, I mean, that starts to talk about, again, the depth that this can go to. And I think this is one of the elements that drove wanting to have the conversation today, drove the desire to have this as one of the social hours, because as we talked about with that idea of the cognizant cultural calendar, it might just start with a bit more thinking about what's going in that calendar. But it scales very quickly. It gets you into maybe nervous spaces for some people, but spaces where there are great rewards, not just for you as a team, sort of the clients, the brands you're working with, but you as an agency and as a business, actually what that brings, the new creativity, the new approach, the new thinking, ultimately is going to help us as an industry. And I guess it's the kind of the ultimate grand level of all of this, that if we're all doing a bit more with our cultural calendars on a day-to-day basis, within the conversations we're having within our businesses, with the diversity of the recruitment we're doing, actually it's going to have that knock-on impact longer term, which is, I guess, the kind of optimism we're both sharing with this.
For sure, definitely. I think it does start for a lot of organizations somewhere small. But giving the example, Pepsi in particular, they came under a lot of flack for the Kendall Jenner ad, right? And that's because they weren't aware of how to present Pepsi to the community that they're trying to speak to. And if they just started with recognition that, hold up, maybe we should actually bring someone or bring people from that community, imagine the sales that it would have led to. But also, if brands are fearing getting things wrong, that's why you should do it. Because if you're going to do it anyway, make sure you bring in the team that can help you understand this is why we won't get things wrong, because it will save us billions as well. Because that's where it is, it's lost revenue. At the end of the day, it's still a saving that will be implemented and will be rolled out across the Pepsi company, right? And these are the small things that brands need to be just taking a step back. It has to start like ideally corporate strategy, brand strategy to begin with. Definitely CMOs need to recognize that it impacts share price and share value. And that's the importance of just being strategic with diversity inclusion. Start with definitely the cultural calendar, put in the key seasons. So if you was going big, you put in the key seasons, have like a amplification, influence marketing strategy that is very strong. But if you're wary, maybe don't go for all the key seasons, scale it back a bit, start small. And that's the way you can go big if you're brave enough and believe there's depth to what you're doing. But if you're not, just start small with key seasons. Understand which influences will help you speak to the community, genuinely speak to the community, and that will give you the foundations to keep growing that. And you'll see, because it's been proved by the CMO and adding value to bottom line, it will start to impact, your HR policy, your company policies, and add value across the organization, which could recover share prices for potentially struggling companies, struggling organizations. But it is that small step, but it's a brave step. That's how we recommend starting anyway, in an ideal world.
Well, hopefully a few folk here who've been on the call, been inspired a bit to take that extra small step, look for that deeper insight, and hopefully think a bit more about some of the work they're doing. A huge thanks to you and the Muslin Influencer team, Creed and Culture team. There's going to be links to those guys afterwards. We're also working on a inclusion summit,
yes,
I believe, in the coming months. So we'll be sure to share that around. I'd also signpost again some of the great work the PRCA are doing, diversity group there, who again, some brilliant speakers, some brilliant thought pieces coming out from those guys trying to make a difference to the industry as a whole. And also just a bit close to home, M&C Saatchi, we're doing some interesting work trying to get fresher talent in If you are on the lookout, as I know many people are, there's a great initiative called Open House, which is very much a kind of open training scheme, really, to anyone and everyone. So the aim there is that we're trying to get new, fresh thinking in. So we'll post all those links afterwards. Our details will be there as well. So really, if you've got any questions, and I do really recommend coming to Saif with more questions. I have a real problem that I generally am making his life more difficult because I'm giving him more things, more people to talk to. But I'd highly recommend getting in touch with him and speaking to the team more. And with that, thanks really to everyone who's been here. Thanks for the questions, and thanks for the questions in advance. And yeah, Saif, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Cheers.